Welcome to the third episode of the TerpTalk podcast presented by Viner Consulting. This is your host, Mason the Intern Viner.
And your co-host, Jordan Viner.
And today on the TerpTalk podcast, we will start with a recap of last week's podcast. Then we'll get into Israeli sports because this podcast is coming to you from Tel Aviv, Israel. Then we'll talk about NBA versus NFL pay rates. And finally, we will reveal Jordan's top 5 Terps to ever play in the EuroLeague. Jordan, get us started.
Well, in our travels throughout Greece, we noticed that one team had gear everywhere. There were flags on boats, driveways. I saw a few T-shirts out there too. That was the Olympikanos Club located in Athens, Greece.
And we also talked with a cab driver who was an Olympikanos fan that grew up in Athens, and he told us an interesting stat that over 50% of the population in Greece roots for the Olympikanos Club. We were also able to see the Olympikanos FC Stadium and Olympikanos BC Stadium.
Yeah, the Olympikanos FC Stadium was it was modified for the 2004 Olympics in Athens, and it looks gorgeous from the outside. Peace and Friendship Stadium, their basketball facility, also looked very nice and professional. And it was really interesting to talk actual, just real sports with someone from the area.
Yeah, so let's get into the week's topics. Jordan, fire up the shot clock.
Shot clock is ready.
So I'll start off Israeli sports. So the most popular sport here in Israel is soccer, followed by a close second being basketball. So Jordan, tell us about some of the clubs here in Israel.
Well, the one everybody knows about here is Maccabi Tel Aviv. Maccabi is truly ingrained in Israeli culture. We know this by growing up in the Jewish community, that Maccabi has a global reach with the Jewish population, and it's really quite something to see.
Well, there's also another thing going on here in Israel right now called the Maccabi Games, which is like a Jewish-Israeli Olympic Games for high school-aged kids. And I happen to know 2 people that are here in Israel playing in the Maccabi. One of them plays for the USA girls lacrosse team, and the other one plays for the Israeli men's lacrosse team.
So, and if we look at soccer in Israel, the top league is known as the Israeli Premier League. And I know Maccabi absolutely rules in soccer.
You're talking about Maccabi Tel Aviv, who has won a combined over the many leagues that have occurred here in Israel, 51 Israeli championships. They have recently started a Israeli Premier League tournament that is still not as important as the regular season, because the way that soccer works is the regular season champion is the real champion, but they have added a tournament that Maccabi Tel Aviv has won 16 out, which is tied for first with a team from Jerusalem and Maccabi Haifa, their rival.
Now, Maccabi Haifa is actually not related to Maccabi Tel Aviv, despite them sounding very similar. I'm assuming Maccabi means something related to sports at this point. So if we look at basketball, this landscape is completely different here.
Yeah, there are different teams are prominent in basketball. Unlike the rest of Europe, which we talked about the club system on last week's podcast, but Hapoel Jerusalem is one of the bigger basketball clubs in Israel, and they have a player that used to be an all-star in the NBA that was one of our favorite players from the early NBA video games. And Jordan, who is it?
And that player is Amari Stoudemire. I loved watching him and Steve Nash play on the St. Less Suns team led by Mike D'Antoni in the early 2000s. I was disappointed when he went to the Knicks because I wasn't a huge Knicks fan, but I knew that he wanted to play in Israel. I didn't think he actually did it.
Well, you see, that was a complicated story because he was trying to go to an Israeli team, but he decided then to play out his multi-million-dollar contract with the Knicks. Then he played for a season for the Mavericks. And when he finally came here to Israel, it was such a big deal to the Jerusalem club and the fans here because they were waiting to get this big NBA star guy onto their team. And they just recently opened a new arena that fits UEFA Euro League specifications to have bigger tournaments here in Israel.
It's really exciting for the Israeli basketball fans. So if we look internationally here with the EuroLeague, they play in the EuroLeague, which is really interesting because they're not technically in Europe.
Yeah, they're actually technically in Asia, but they were forced out of the Asian leagues by Middle Eastern political pressures, and it just didn't really fit for Israel to be with those other countries considering the history between them. So they were able to move to Europe, but it had a really negative effect on their sports qualifications for big tournaments because they had to play the Spain's, Italy, France, and now Greece is rising as a power, so it's really tough for them to qualify.
Yeah, in FIBA, they have to play some of the best, probably the best division in FIBA in terms of talent with Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Lithuania, and others. So, and in FIFA, it's a death match. They have to play Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany. The list just goes on and on. And it's really sad for Israeli sports because they haven't qualified for anything since 1986 in FIBA and 1970 in FIFA.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because it's not like they've completely fallen off the map. They were top 15 ranked in 2008 in soccer before the 2010 World Cup, but they still weren't able to qualify because who knows what's happening in these games because there's just so much talent on the field that it doesn't really matter where you're ranked. You still have to play teams that are just as good as you constantly.
Well, the comparison I like is Maryland moving into the Big Ten. We in football more than basketball, if we had a top 20 team, we could plausibly still be the 5th or 6th best team in the conference. It's the same thing with FIFA here, is they could be the number 15, but that wouldn't matter because they're still behind the UK, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy. I think those are all top 15 teams right now. They're still not good enough.
Yeah, it's just a really interesting story because you don't see many medals for them recently in like the Asian Cup or the European Cup, but when they were playing in the Asian Cup, they were a medaling team. They won some golds, silvers, and bronze, but I believe that they actually have never won a soccer medal in the UEFA.
I would definitely believe it. I was just thinking back to what I said earlier. I actually left out France. That's how stacked this division is in soccer. It's almost impossible for them to beat some of these other teams. And I just keep going in my head of I missed that team too. There's just so much talent in Europe in soccer, it's almost nearly impossible for Israel to qualify.
Well, it's not. Nothing's impossible in sports. I mean, we've seen that many times. But if you move on to Israel's Olympic accomplishments, they have one gold medal. It's from the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, Greece, and it is in sailboarding, which is a sailboat sail on a surfboard. And the way that the sport works is they have courses and configurations that you have to sailboard through, which I don't think I really ever heard of that before researching this topic. They also have some silver and bronze in
judo, I think.
Yeah, they also have gotten some other medals, but the one gold is in sailboarding.
Yeah, sailboarding does not seem like a real sport to me. It seems like something you'd make up as a kid. We could sail through this course and get points, but they did win it, and we can't underestimate the power of the Israeli will to win. And I think it's possible in the future. They are a rising basketball power to maybe push some of these other European clubs and try to make a name for themselves. I know Maccabi has actually won the EuroLeague a few times, so the talent is definitely there.
Well, I'll assume that not many people listening to this podcast know what sailboarding is, but when I was reading pages about sailboarding, it's a really hard sport. There's a whole thing, if you look it up on Wikipedia, for the 2004 games. The course was actually one of the hardest that was ever used, so it is an accomplishment to win gold in anything in the Olympics. So, Jordan, what's your final thoughts on Israeli sports?
Well, it's certainly been interesting to learn about Israeli sports. I know they are a growing sports nation as the country matures more. It's still a relatively young country. And it's really interesting for me to look at sports around the world and see what catches on. I know soccer is a bigger national game, really everywhere but the U.S. Basketball has grown, and I'm very proud to say that. I'm a huge basketball fan, and everywhere we've gone, around the world really, basketball is growing and getting a foothold, and it's really exciting for me to see that.
Well, here's my opinion on it. I really wish that Israel stayed in the Asian qualifying because then you would hear so much more about them. They would be one of the number one teams in both soccer and basketball in that division. It just didn't work out that way. But they are growing in basketball. They're top 40 in basketball now, and I expect to see a lot from them in the coming years for basketball.
Well, we'll see if we get Israel in FIBA 2019 in China.
So moving on now, our second topic of the day will be the NFL versus NBA pay rates. And first, remember for all your Maryland sports needs to check out our YouTube page, Wayne Terp. That is the TerpTalk YouTube page, to check out inside the scenes with lacrosse, basketball, and Maryland football. That is Wayne Terp on YouTube. So Jordan, in the past few weeks, Derek Carr was made the highest paid NFL player with a $25 million a year contract. And then, in the past few weeks, James Harden was made the highest paid NBA player ever with a contract for the 2022-2023 season of $57 million. How does a more profitable league like the NFL pay less than the NBA?
Well, to get some actual numbers here, The NFL makes about $12 billion per year. Okay? The NBA makes about $9 billion. Now that stat may have changed with the recent NBA contract that caused cap spike we saw last season, but I think it's still somewhere around there. So the NFL has a $3 billion gap with the NBA. So I'm not entirely sure how this play gap is so wide. The obvious answer that most people will say is, well, the NFL has to play so many more people. That's not just including players. That's staff, coaches, etc. So I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Well, I don't think anybody is, except for the NFL league itself, but maybe even they're not sure at this point. But you're talking about a team that pays 53 guys and then 10 practice squad players. So they're playing 63 players, coaches, training staff, building security. I mean, they're paying all these guys that are so much more than apparently the NBA pays, but I still don't think it's a $3 billion gap.
Well, honestly, I don't have a justification here. I did run the numbers the other day, and the NFL has about 1,300 more players on rosters than the NBA does. But it's still, when I divvy up the cash, it doesn't make sense that the pay gap would be this wide. It should be, according to my calculations, which could be off, but it should be about $35 million for the top NFL player. It's $25 million. So I think the obvious answer here is that the owners are taking more off the top in the NFL.
Well, I don't really want to get into what the owners are taking because that can always be reduced by the collective bargaining agreements or the CBAs. But I think one thing that's really helped the NBA players get more money is a thing called the max contract that was put in by the owners in the most recent collective bargaining agreement to protect them. But I actually think it's raised how much the NBA players get.
Well, I think, the max is in place to protect owners. It gives everybody a bar to look at and say, okay, that's what we should be making if that player hits these qualifications. And that helps NFL owners, helps NBA owners figure out what they should be paying players because that's as much as they can pay players. And it varies greatly. So Otto Porter's max per year is $26 million. James Harden is more than double that at $57 million. We need to keep in mind here that Otto Porter, who has the minimum max contract, which seems like a bit of a double negative there, is still making more than Derek Carr is as the highest paid player in the league.
See, this helps the NFL guys, too. It gives that number, as you said, the $57 million or the $26 million. It gives you something to look at and say, well, I think I'm that good, and another team will pay me this much, so I'm going to ask for that contract. But it still doesn't make sense to me how Otto Porter's minimum max contract is higher than the highest paid NFL player ever in Derek Carr's $25 million.
See, that's the thing, though. It doesn't make sense. That's just it right there. The NFL players obviously did not bargain the CBA well. The NBA players have been lauded over the last few years for bargaining well, and they have earned max contracts that have spiked. They have earned protections. They have things NFL players don't have, and I don't know why that is. I do know why that is. Maybe the NFL last time they went on strike in 2011, they didn't strike for very long because the players weren't prepared to actually stop getting paychecks. And several players, most notably Vince Young, although several others, had to take out second mortgages and loans to pay their daily bills because they weren't ready to actually go on strike. And a little bit ago, Richard Sherman, I believe, said that the NFL players need to start getting their money together so they can really, really go on a strike next time, which is 2021.
So, till that quote was taken in an interview from Richard Sherman, I feel that the NFL players tweeting, we need to get paid more, it's time for our salaries to raise too, was treated like a joke. But now, sports media, including us, is really preparing for a possible NFL season lockout like the NHL had.
The NHL season lockout happened in 2004 or 5, I believe. And it was, in fact, a whole season lockout. Something that we hadn't seen in sports in a long time before that. And that's because the NHL players knew what was coming, they knew they were getting screwed, and they hunkered down and were willing to take a entire season pay loss to get what they wanted, and they got what they wanted. This last season, the NHL numbers weren't what they wanted them to be, but because of their CBA, the NHL CBA agreement mandated a rise in the salary cap. NHL players did what they were going to do, and they did it. NFL players need to be ready to really take a loss like that. They need to be ready to sacrifice a lot to gain a lot in the future.
So here's my opinion on the specific season lockout thing is, as a player, even in a much less league than the NFL or a professional sports league, I still would be very angry if a season was taken away from me based on how much I'm getting paid. I mean, these guys are getting paid $25 million a year. I guess it's just hard for them to watch another league that they view as inferior get paid way more.
Well, the NFL players sacrifice more. We know this. They put their bodies on the line every day, and they just feel like they're not getting compensated enough. When you look at the NBA. But another thing we need to remember is the NBA is by far the highest paid league in the world. It's not even close anymore. The Premier League, MLB, nothing comes close. And I think but the issue is that's what the bar of the NFL players measure against, is because those are their counterparts in the sports world.
I think it's because the NFL see this because they know that their league makes the most money. That's not a hidden fact. They know that their league is making the most money, and they want to be the players because they play in that league to make the most money that an athlete can make.
You would think it would make sense, but reality is 53 players doesn't take a significant hit. But the players should be higher. Now, I didn't look this up, and maybe we should have, but I don't know what the NFL minimum is, do you?
I believe it's somewhere around $500,000 for a rookie, and then it increases as you sign veteran players.
So even the minimum players then, I think you're right. I think the NFL veterans minimum is around $1 million. The NBA's veteran minimum is around 2.5. That right there says it all. Even the bottom players get paid so much more than the NBA, it's ridiculous.
So a few years ago, I believe the NBA minimum was $1.2 million, and now you see how much that's raised about by $1.3 million raised for the minimum contract.
Okay, so this brings up another thing that I think might change the balance before the CBA runs out in 2021, which is the NFL. The reason the cap spike is so big and the reason NBA players get paid so much is because of the monster, one of the largest TV contracts in history was signed last year. The NFL has not signed a new TV contract in a pretty good amount of time. I know they just signed Thursday night one. That's one game. It's the worst game of the week. When they really sit down and sign a new contract, we may see the cap spike similar to the NBA. Now, hold on. Here's something that will be interesting for everybody to watch, not just sports fans. The NFL's streaming rights, not TV rights, their online streaming rights will be up in 2018. That will be interesting to watch, both for the TV market, but also to see if that changes how much players get paid.
So here's what I think will be interesting for the sports guys that like how much these guys get paid. I think they're going to adjust it differently with the cap spike because they don't want what happened in the NBA to happen in the NFL, where guys like the Jan Mahimis were very overpaid, like Evan Turner and Jan Mahimi. They don't want that to happen, so it might be a gradual raise to the same amount that the NBA cap is at.
Well, to go back to the NHL, that's what they did. They decided to stretch out the spike for years, and it's worked very well for the NHL players. I know they still don't get paid as much as anybody else in America in terms of sports, but they do get paid much more than they did a few years ago. So I think if the NFL players and the NFL agree to moderate a potential cap spike, this could work very well for both sides. But this still doesn't bring up the issue is, where's the money going for the NFL? There's $3 billion sitting around. I know the operations must be more. They have to pay for more equipment and such, but it doesn't justify where all the money's going.
Well, you're talking about the equipment times 32, the helmets times 32, like everything is times 32, so it's not like one team is holding the $3 billion. It also does get spread out around everything in the league.
All right, well, we have about 30 seconds left on the shot clock here. Mason, what's your final thought?
My final thought is the NFL players are going to end up getting paid more. That's just it. Because, the CBA might not be up for 3 years, but they can all just retire tomorrow, and they would then have to get paid more if they wanted them to come back.
I don't know if it's a viable option for the NFL players. But I do think something needs to change here, and I think the NFL players will get their way eventually. It seems like they always do. To a degree, labor always wins, especially in such a specialized field like this.
So before Jordan reveals his top 5 Terps in Europe, remember to listen 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, 1300 CBS Sports Radio in Baltimore, to the Sports Maven presented by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, to hear Bruce talk about all Maryland and Baltimore sports. And Jordan, let's get the top 5 list started.
So through my research for Terp and the pros, I've gone to find this for European basketball. And I've also noticed there's a lot of Maryland players in Europe. So this is my top 5 best Maryland basketball players based on the information that I can find for European basketball. So we're going to start each one with when they play at Maryland, their accomplishments at Maryland, and then their accomplishments in Europe.
So we will start the reveal with number 5 on the list. And Jordan, tell us who it is.
Number 5 on the list is one of my personal favorite Maryland players of all time, DJ Strawberry. So DJ played at Maryland from 2003-2007. He stacked up some awards in the ACC, which is honorable mention All-Freshman ACC in 2004. He was injured most 2005. Honorable mention All-Defensive in 2006. First team All-Defensive in 2007. And second team All-ACC 2007. So after his time in College Park, he bounced around the NBA, the D-League for a few years. But once he landed in Europe, he made a splash with making the Lithuanian basketball all-star team in 2011. Now, unfortunately, that's his only actual accolade because he's moved around a lot, but he is recognized in the European leagues as one of the most consistent players in Europe and a truly elite defender. He currently plays in Beşiktaş in the city of Istanbul.
So, in the European League, it's a scoring-based league, so having a stopper defender is also really valuable because they're able to shut down or at least handle the other team's best scorer, and that's where a guy like a DJ Strawberry holds value in the Euro League.
Now, I see DJ Strawberry as someone similar for an NBA comparison to like a Tony Allen type. Tony Allen is a shooting guard, plays for the Grizzlies most of his career, a real grind player. In fact, his nickname is the Grind Father because he's 37 years old now. But he is recognized for having elite defensiveness, but he can't score as much, but it doesn't matter because he can play good defense.
So that's where the value in a guy like DJ Strawberry is in the league, and he is number 5 on this list. And number 4 is a guy that I don't think most Terp fans, unless they're a super Maryland fan like us, would really remember.
Oh, I know you didn't remember him right away either, and most people won't, you're right. He is a Kennedy Bekwe. He went number 25 for the Terps, originally from Nigeria, though he grew up in California. He played at Maryland the same years as DJ Strawberry, 2003 to 2007. He was a first-team All-Defensive along with DJ in 2007, and was honorable mention All-ACC in 2007. So he doesn't have as much awards as many others because he's played for a mind-blowing 19 teams in 10 years, including 4 teams in 2016.
So I looked into this after hearing the stat that Jordan put out, and he has moved countries. He moved from Germany to Puerto Rico in one season, so he's the true journeyman on this list.
He puts all other journeymen to shame. It's not that uncommon, actually, for American players, so not to this degree, to move around a lot because they don't actually have a homeland. Or a homeland in Europe, excuse me. So they're more open to moving, and opens up trades across borders for European teams. So he does have a few accolades, though. He was a Turkish Super League, one of the most respected leagues in Europe, All-Star in 2009. And because he bounced around so much, he didn't really gain recognition again until 2015, where he was second-team All-Pro in the Australian National League, another very highly regarded league. He's another defensive player, a very grinder, blocking, rebounding type. He doesn't score a lot either, and he currently plays for the Alain Chalon team of France.
So he takes on the Gary Williams mold of just a grinder, hard defender, good rebounder, really tough guy down low. But we were talking about European basketball before this, and you told me that there are guys that are around 6'8" that play center, and Kenway Bekwe is a true big man. Where does he fit in?
Well, he kind of fits the mold, actually. He's about 6'10", and they do need... It's like if every team was like the Warriors, although not the same talent level. They're shooting focused, and they don't worry too much about the trash plays. So guys like this add that additional level of grit. And it's really a testament to Gary Williams' style of play that these players are still able to adapt even though they don't necessarily fit the play style. So I'm going to give number 3 to Mason because it's one of his all-time favorite players. Mason, take it away.
Number 3 on this list happens to be a guy that we talked about last week on the podcast, and that is James Bees. And he played for the Terps from 2004 to 2008. He was an honorable mention All-ACC in 2007, second team All-ACC in 2008, first team All-ACC defense in 2008, and then he moved to Siberia for the 2011 season, where he was the Siberian Cup MVP in 2011, Turkish League All-Star in 2012, Spanish League Dunk Contest, since his name's James Beast, he's just a vicious dunker, champion in 2012. He played in the Greek League for the rest of the world team because it works like the NBA Futures game where it's the rest of the world versus the USA in the Future League, but it's Greece in the Greek Basketball League. He was an All-Star in that league in 2013, 14, and 16, and he is one of the longest tenured American players of any team in Europe, and he has a great nickname.
The actual name of the player, I don't know if you actually ever said it, was James Gist. And he is truly a special player in Europe. in terms of Maryland fans, simply for the reason that he has stayed on one team for so long. It makes it viable to buy a jersey of him, as he was just extended again through 2019. They really do like him there. He is a very good addition, again, to the shooting style of Greece. He's developed a three-point shot somehow, and he is another junkyard dog. He gets rebounds, he plays inside for the most part, he blocks a lot of shots, and he's one of my favorite players in Europe.
Well, he's also a vicious dunker, and really where that holds value is that he's been on the same team for such a long time. And from guys that aren't from the country that the team is in, it's really hard to get guys that stay for long periods of time that are from international.
It really is true, and it's amazing they stayed that long. I think he must feel at home at this point in Greece. He's been there for, I think, 5 or 6 years now. I would be interested to know if he knows Greek or not at this point. So let's move on to
number 2 that Bruce Posner actually gave us when you were talking Euro basketball and Terps on TerpTalk a few weeks ago. So who's number 2 on our list, Jordan?
Number 2 is Nick Kinder-Medley, NCM. So Nick Kinder-Medley, a lot of Terp fans may remember because he was a big-time scorer at Maryland. He played at Maryland from 2002 to 2006. And was third-team All-ACC in back-to-back years in 2005 and 6. So he took a little bit to get his footing in Europe. He probably had to adjust to the play style like so many American players do. But once he got going, he really got going. In 2011, he made the first team All-Liga ACB in France. Now, the ACB is different in that it's a second-tier league, which means they play in the Euro Cup. Mason, what do I mean?
So the Euro Cup is for teams that feel that they don't have the talent level to play in the Euro League, or Euro League teams that don't have as good seasons that qualify for the Euro Cup. So it really helps out teams that aren't as talented get a good tournament, because it's still really respected, but it's just meant for teams in lower levels or really high-level teams that haven't had good seasons.
So it's kind of hard to find something to compare it to in the U.S. My best guess is FBS and FCS, and that FCS teams could play in the FBS, but they elect not to because their competition level better suits the FCS. So he made the second-team All-Euro Cup in 2011, and then had one of the bigger accomplishments on this list so far, probably the biggest, in making first-team All-Euro Cup in 2012. Now, after he made first-team All-Euro Cup, a club in Kazakhstan, who is not a big basketball country, decided that they were going to take a risk and signing him on a 2-year, $2 million contract, the club being BC Astana. And what Nick said himself was this was equivalent to naming him the franchise player. They named him a cornerstone of the franchise.
So the reason that a team in a smaller basketball nation with not as much revenue would do this is they want to take a chance to become the real big team. So they're going to find this guy that might not play for the biggest team, but he's really getting to the height of his career, and they're going to sign him to a huge contract to try and make the leap, to start the leap to the biggest levels of European League basketball.
So after this, after his 2 years there, he moved on to a team in Monaco. Maybe he just wanted somewhere warmer than Kazakhstan at that point. And he currently plays for CB Asturias of Madrid, Spain. He is about 35 years old, so we could probably say he's in the twilight of his career. And he's had a very, very successful run.
So we're going to move on here to some honorable mentions, guys that just barely didn't make this list. And Jordan, but they're still in the top 10 if they didn't make this list. Jordan, who are they?
Well, I guess my 6 and 7 on this list, though we didn't really go that far, would be Sean Mosley and Terrell Stoglin. So Sean Mosley, I'm very happy to learn, is still playing basketball. He was one of my favorite players growing up. I loved his afro, and I loved his style of play. He was a real nose-to-the-grindstone guy who really had elite defensive skills, though he never got the scoring that we hoped he would. And he is currently playing in France, where he has a bit of a fan club there because of his grind and his work ethic that he shows in the basketball court every game.
We got a chance to do an interview with Sean after one of the Maryland basketball games, and he seemed really happy with where he is now. He still said that he can't speak French, which I found to be very interesting, with him living there for a long time. But I really liked him too back in the early 2010s. And just check out our interview with him. He talked a lot about his basketball in France. On the Wayne Terp YouTube page, just search Sean Mosley.
All right, and the other one is a complete flip side player who is Terrell Stoglin. Now, Terrell Stoglin, I don't remember a lot about. I know he was a huge scorer in his time at Maryland. He kind of reminded me of John Gokish when he played. and he is currently playing in Lebanon, very close to us right now, actually, where he famously put up 73 points, I believe, in one game. I believe a Lebanese record. He is known as the Allen Iverson of Lebanon due to his scoring and speed. And although it's not as high class as some of these other leagues on this list, it's still something to be called the Allen Iverson of any league.
Now, when we were talking about this podcast, I actually said it's good to be known as the Allen Iverson of everything in basketball, but just a really great scorer. And, that's always been his talent, is shooting and scoring. And to score 70 points in any professional basketball league anywhere is just a great accomplishment.
So those are our mentions. And number one on our list really doesn't even compare to anybody else. He was truly one of the greatest European players of all time.
And that is Sarunas Jasikevičius. And really, for a lot of Maryland fans, I don't really think if they had to guess the number one on this list, they would ever guess Sarunas Jasikevičius.
So Sarunas is someone who most people probably won't remember. He didn't really come into his own until his later career at Maryland. He played at 94 through 98 under Gary Williams. And once he went back to Europe after he finished in Maryland, he really took off.
He exploded!
Now, there's so many accomplishments. Almost all of his accomplishments would be listed on any other player on this list, but there's so many of them that I had to narrow it down to the highlights.
Well, if you look at all of his accomplishments on like a Wikipedia or anything, if you broke it up into thirds, he would probably be 1, 2, and 3 on this list.
Yeah, honestly, it's probably true. He is truly one of the greatest European players of all time, so let's get into it. In 2000, he was the Slovenian League MVP, and then in 2003, now keep in mind, that doesn't mean he didn't accomplish anything in 1 and 2. It just means they weren't big enough to make this list. So in 2003, he really had his greatest season of all time. He was the Spanish League Finals MVP, Eurobasket MVP, and Mr. Europa 2003. Those mean is, it's like college basketball where there's multiple MVP awards. So he won 2 out of the however many MVP awards in Europe. And he kept going. In 2004, he won the Israeli Super League MVP, or he was a finalist, excuse me. He was the All-Europe Player of the Year in 2004 and 2005, the EuroLeague Final Four MVP in 2005, the Israeli Super League MVP in 2005, and then he went back to the NBA for a few years where he played for the Warriors and Pacers. But he still, while in the NBA, in 2008, he was voted a 50 greatest European League contributors of all time. He returned to Europe and won the Greek Cup MVP in 2012. And then in 2014, he won the extremely prestigious EuroLeague Legend Award, of which there's only been 6 of all time. It's like making the Hall of Fame of the Hall of Fame. And then he went into coaching.
So in 2017, he was the Lithuanian Coach of the Year, and he currently coaches for Žalgiris Kaunas of Lithuania.
So Mr. Jasikevičius has truly made a great impact in the European game. He is considered probably the greatest point guard in European League history at this point. And I think it's fair to say that he has made an impact on Maryland sports by doing this.
So I would think of it as every time they say his name and announce his name, they say he's from the University of Maryland in College Park. And I feel like that would have a great effect on the Alex Len, Baron Weiss, Michael Tchaikovsky, Ivan Bender, these guys that are from Europe that Maryland keeps on getting.
You could argue, although I don't know if this is true or not, you could make an argument that his play going to America and coming back to Europe has made possibly an impact on European basketball as a whole. In that maybe a player like Kristaps Porzingis, who's only 20 years old, would have grown up with Jasikevičius as one of his heroes and decided to go to America and play basketball because of someone like him. I mean, you think it's crazy, but they are from the same country. And I'm very proud to call him a Maryland Terrapin.
Yeah, I would have to say the same, being very proud to call him a Maryland Terrapin. And I just feel that it's kind of odd that a guy like Sarunas Jasikevičius would be the number one guy on this list, because if you interviewed, I would say, 50 Maryland fans, maybe 3 of them would guess that Sarunas Jasikevičius would be number one on this list.
That'll wrap it up this week. Mason, what do we got in slate next week?
So next week, we're going to start off with...
So that'll wrap it up this week. Mason, what's on tap for next week?
So we're going to start previewing the Maryland football season. And next week, we're going to do an all-Maryland football podcast. I will start it off with what I see from the Maryland football roster this season. Then we're going to get into 2 game per week previews leading up to the start of the Maryland football season, starting off with Texas and Towson next week.
So that'll also wrap up our European basketball segment. We really enjoyed doing this, and we hope to do it more in the future. So for basketball, that's it for now. We're going football from here on out.
Yeah, remember to check out Wayne Terp on YouTube for TerpTalk interviews. Check out last week's and the week before's podcast. And check out Bruce on 1300 CBS Sports Radio in Baltimore at 9 a.m. on Saturdays. That's it for this week's podcast. Hope to see you next week.